Welcome to The Tech Life with Rich Conte, bringing you stories from the front lines of the tech industry and the insider's perspective on starting, growing, or thriving in a technology venture.
Welcome to another episode of Silicon Harbor Radio, brought to you by the Tech Life podcast and Silicon Harbor Magazine. I'm your host, Rich Conte. Each episode, we take you inside Charleston's rapidly growing tech and startup community and give a voice to the local entrepreneurs and other contributors driving that growth. This episode, we talk with a CEO who was front and center for a major acquisition event in Charleston's technology industry at the end of 2015 and has since moved on to another Charleston-based startup to help shepherd it through an exciting growth period. If you're a regular Silicon Harbor Radio Tech Life podcast listener, then you're probably obsessively curious about technology like I am. Before we get to our guest, I want to let my technologically curious listeners know about another tech-related podcast that you're likely to get hooked on. It's called Malicious Life, and it tells the forgotten tales of the pioneers of the cybersecurity industry and the criminals that shaped its early days. Cybersecurity is in the news almost daily as large-scale ransomware attacks paralyze public services, corporations, and governments. It's fascinating to discover the history of malicious attacks, how they first appeared in the 1970s and 80s and have increased exponentially ever since. Host Rand Levy talks with both former hackers and security experts, investigating and telling their story over the course of the first season's 6 episodes. I just finished an episode featuring Graham Cluley, an award-winning security blogger, researcher, and public speaker who's worked with law enforcement agencies on investigations into hacking groups and regularly appears on TV and radio explaining computer security threats. I'm looking forward to listening to other episodes and hearing from guests like Stephen Cobb, who's been researching computer security and data privacy for 25 years, advising companies, consumers, and government agencies on the protection of sensitive data and systems. Cobb is featured in Episode 3, Spam Empires, where they take a look at one of the oldest forms of criminal activity on the web, the spam empires of the 90s and 2000s. Check it out. It's like Tech Life meets Serial. In November of 2015, one of the early success stories to grow out of the recent boom in Charleston's technology industry, Spark, was acquired by Booz Allen Hamilton. We're fortunate for the opportunity to talk with the chief executive who led Spark through that acquisition about the experience and also about his new role, taking the reins once again as CEO for another Charleston-based startup with a promising future. Our guest on this episode of Silicon Harbor Radio, brought to you by the Tech Life podcast and Silicon Harbor Magazine, is Marc Murphy. Marc is CEO of Atlatl Software. Welcome to the show, Marc.
Thank you. Thanks, Rich. Thanks for having me.
Marc, for listeners that might not be yet familiar with Atlatl, can you outline the basics? What's your mission and what products do you offer?
Our mission is to create a suite of sales enablement, sales acceleration tools, mainly for the manufacturer and distribution space.
What are some of the interesting initiatives that Atlatl is currently pursuing, and what are some of the most immediate challenges you're facing?
Right now, one of the most interesting things we're doing is developing an augmented reality feature for our 3D sales enablement suite. And that's created a lot of challenges in that AR, very early to market. The adoption around AR from a mainstream type adoption is really early. So we're trying to push out a product that people really don't understand how to adopt yet. We know we're early to market with it, so we're excited about the potential. But right now, we see challenges in mass adoption for that product suite.
Prior to Atlatl, you were Chief Operating Officer and then CEO for Spark, and then leading them through the acquisition by Booz Allen Hamilton. What led you to the opportunity to lead Atlatl, and what were some of the things that most interested you in taking on the challenge?
After we sold Spark and achieved a really positive exit, a great story there, I really felt the draw to get back to a startup. Prior to Spark, I was a big company guy and really felt comfortable in the startup environment and really felt the draw to get back to a startup. So, I was fortunate through my network that Atlatl was at a really interesting inflection point that they needed to develop their leadership team to take the company to scale. So this presented an opportunity for me to get back to another startup at a little earlier stage than when I joined Spark, which presented its own set of challenges, but also the opportunity for me to build a company and a culture based on my design.
What do you think the most significant lessons you learned along the way, particularly those that are most directly relevant to your role as CEO here at Atlatl?
Spark proved to be a great learning experience. I think like any startup, you end up learning at a very accelerated pace. I think the biggest lesson we took away was the importance of building a culture of really deep communication and trust, full transparency, particularly when you're dealing with a under 50 population of people. You have a great ability to be fully transparent, and that kind of communication and creating forums for communication across all people at the company builds a real strong foundation for what's going to come next, which is big scale.
What's the long-term vision for Atlatl Software, and what does success look like over the next 3 to 5 years?
I think 3 to 5 years in startup world seems like a lifetime right now, but building a stable company, building a successful, stable company, which I think should be a mission of all companies. Growth, I see a sustainable customer base, significant growth across the market, potentially another location outside of Charleston. Growth through venture capital, private equity, potentially an IPO at some point, I think is the long-term vision. We're really fortunate to have timed the market really well, and it's a very large and global market that we're entering into. And I think that gives the opportunity for really tremendous growth over time.
What's your perspective on the growth of the technology industry here in Charleston? What do you consider to be the biggest factors behind that growth and the biggest challenges we can expect to face going forward?
I think the Charleston tech scene is incredible. When we had the fire at Spark, and I think most people remember that, Charleston tech scene was wonderful. I mean, we almost overnight, we had outreach from across the competitors, partner companies. We ended up having places for all 300 people to work within 48 hours. And that was through an outreach from the smallest company here all the way up to Blackbaud and Benefit Focus. So I think it really showed me that it was a great tech community and people that had a common level of interest in everyone's success at a community level. So I think it's growing. I think it has 5 years ago, if you came to Charleston, you were looking to go to Blackbaud or Benefit Focus, and really that you had to grow a career in tech in those two companies. That's not the case now. You can come for a startup, you can go to Benefit Focus, you can go back to a startup. So your opportunities to grow a career at all levels, really, all the way up to executive, can be found right here in Charleston. And I don't think that's something we could have said 5 or 10 years ago here. And I think that's going to continue. The challenge, as I see, and I've spoke about this before, is access to capital and access to talent. Those two will continue to be tightly coupled. And I think as we solve one, we'll solve another. But we need to find access to capital at all levels. And that's a struggle, I think, for startups looking for that initial capital and looking for really the seed to take them to kind of an A round and beyond. So we have to solve that if we're going to have a vibrant startup scene and a growth scene. And then talent. And we have to have the talent and access to talent to scale companies. And the feedback I get when I go to VCs in California is, can you scale a company in Charleston, South Carolina? So we need to be ready for those. We need a plan to be able to address it, because you can scale a company in Charleston, South Carolina, and there's a lot of people that have proved that. But we need to be ready. We need to prove that case on scale. That will continue to be a challenge as we look at building out our CS departments, not only at Clemson and USC, but here at College of Charleston, potentially Citadel, and beyond. What's going to help with that is more success. Exits always help with that. I think the ability to show a continued success of starting companies, building sustainable companies, and then looking for exits in any form, whether it be funding or PE funding or what we did with Spark. That will continue to put Charleston on the map. As we do that, VCs and private equity firms will take notice, more people will come here, and the talent equation will be solved. So long answer, but this is a great place to be in the tech community. We need to continue to focus on solving those challenges.
How do you think the growth has impacted the opportunities and challenges that Atlatl Software is currently facing?
we're living both those things right now. You know, we're in the early processes of capital raising. So as I'm out there talking to venture capital firms outside of Charleston in major hubs like California and Boston and New York, you constantly have to really be forward thinking about how you're going to address growing the company in a geography outside of those three areas. So that's a challenge. It's a challenge you need to be ready for and address. You know, fortunately, I think the economics of building a business outside of those markets and in Charleston are in our favor. So you can address it that way. And continuing to look at how I scale talent. And, you know, fortunately, at Spark, I was able to personally hire a couple hundred engineers over my course of time there. I have a deep understanding of what the talent looks like here, but it still doesn't address my challenges here in finding the right talent, with the right code-based discipline at the right time to scale this company. And that's something we are constantly thinking about. And then small things that become a challenge for all of us is, it sounds very easy to solve, but it's not, is finding the right space. And things like finding parking for all your staff in Charleston becomes something you don't readily think about, but it's a challenge nonetheless of growing a company. We have a desire to stay downtown, and that's something we just have to address here. But it's a challenge of growing a business, I think, in any community. It's something we have to think about.
What are some of the tech-related activities or events here in the local community that you're particularly fond of?
I think there's a lot. There's two that come to mind right off the top is the CDC and what Ernest has done around the digital corridor, I think, is wonderful. I think it's become a center point for a lot of us to network and coordinate. I-5K has turned into, for all of us over the years, a really fun event. And to see that grow to what it's gone to this past year and see the participation by all the companies and the effort they put into themes, great event. And also I think what Stan has done around Dig South, and that continues to turn into what I would call a national level event, that we are marching towards a South by Southwest type level and scale just because of the people he's getting to come in, panelists. I think people's interest from the outside of coming to Charleston for a number of reasons, participate in that event. That event has continued to scale into something I think we should really all be proud of. And when my team asks, are we going to participate in Dig South, it's absolutely. It's part of the community we work in and part of the tech community we want to build.
Where can listeners go to learn more about Atlatl Software and keep up with your progress?
We've been very fortunate to build out what I think is a really capable and exciting marketing presence here. So the best way to follow us and follow not only our progress out in the market and our progress as a software platform, but a little bit about our culture and the fun we have here is through our social media presence, mainly on Twitter and LinkedIn. We have a very active presence there, covering a wide range of topics, great blog posting about our technology and about the markets we're entering, and then we sprinkle in a little bit about the fun and culture we have here over time.
Marc Murphy, CEO of Atlatl Software. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Rich. I appreciate it.
I had the opportunity to meet with Marc at Atlatl Software's offices downtown on Meeting Street before their upcoming move to a larger space. I appreciate Marc taking the time to talk with us and share Atlatl's story with you. I've seen him speak previously at a Startup Grind Charleston event a while back, and he's a passionate advocate for our local tech and entrepreneur communities. Some of the things going on locally that listeners may be interested in include our friends at Startup Grind Charleston recently hosted an event featuring Carolyn Finch, the founder and executive director of Charleston Women in Tech. The Harbor Entrepreneur Center hosts their next happy hour event on Tuesday, August 29th from 5 to 7 p.m. They also recently announced that the 2017 version of their Low Country Hoedown will happen on Saturday, November 4th from 7 to 11 p.m. at the Visitor Center bus shed downtown. That's always a fun event and a great chance to network. And of course, every Wednesday morning at 9 a.m., they host their weekly 1 Million Cups event at the Pacific Box and Crate building. Finally, the Revolve Conference is back this October 26th and 27th at the Charleston Marriott. Carl Hudson Phillips and his team has once again put together a powerhouse slate of speakers. head over to revolveconference.com to learn more and register. Our partners at Silicon Harbor Magazine are a great resource for keeping up with all of the events and news in the Charleston technology, creative, and entrepreneur community. Visit them at siliconharbormag.com and follow them on Twitter at SiliconHBRMAG. You can follow us at TechLifePod and also find us on Facebook. The best way to keep up with the show is to subscribe. For iTunes, visit www.siliconharborradio.com or search for Tech Life with Rich Conte or Silicon Harbor Radio. If you enjoyed the show, let us know by leaving us a rating and a review. Subscribing via RSS is as simple as visiting techlife.libsyn.com/RSS. That's all the time we have on this episode of Silicon Harbor Radio, brought to you by the Tech Life Podcast and Silicon Harbor Magazine. I'm your host, Rich Conte, and thanks for listening.